Hey everyone, this is Dr. Drizzle and welcome to the National Parks Expedition Challenge. Today we're at the Dayton Aviation Heritage National Historical Park, which is a mouthful. We are here today with Ranger Bob and Ranger Kathleen, who work at this amazing facility, and we're going to talk about this great place. We're going to start off though by just saying, hey!
Hey!
Thanks for coming, everybody. Kathleen, we'll start with you. What brought you here? What was your journey to this park?
Yeah, so I'm actually from Dayton, Ohio. So it's kind of nice that I get to work in my hometown and talk about my own city's history every day. But I actually got a master's degree in history here in Dayton and was looking for a job in a museum. And although we're a national park, we're actually comprised of a bunch of museums. So this is a great place to work, and it's a very fun place to be and fun story to talk about.
Thanks. And what about you, Ranger Bob?
I started out doing contract archaeology across the states of Iowa and Wisconsin in the 1970s. But the bottom kind of dropped out of that market. And I'd gotten in the habit of eating on a regular basis, so I wanted to find a place where I could put that background to use. Park Service was a natural place to go. And I worked in a number of different parks before coming to Dayton in 1995.
So 25
I've been
years?
here a little over 25 years, yeah.
Well, we're glad you're here. And I need you to have more energy because you have none, and we just really need to have more, just to let you know.
Okay.
So, first of all, being here with Wilbur and Orville Wright just makes me so excited because I love everything about planes and aviation. But tell us a little bit about the park.
Yeah, so our park talks about the lives of Wilbur and Orville Wright and Paul Laurence Dunbar as well. He is a famous poet and author who grew up with Orville. They teamed up and did some printing together, and it's just a really great place where we get to talk about inventiveness and creativity, and we are here in their neighborhood. This is where Orville and Wilbur grew up, just a block behind us, and this is also where Paul lived the last couple years of his life.
So, earlier this morning, Bob, we talked about how this is a unique park.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
This park was intended to be a partnership between the National Park Service, other organizations, other agencies. So there are currently 5 units of the park that are open. This is the only one that is actually owned and administered by the National Park Service. What we've tried to do here in Dayton is to create a national park that would be as confusing to people as possible. I think we've actually done a pretty good job of it.
And we are standing in front of the visitor center.
One of 2 visitor centers that we operate. This is the Wright Dunbar Interpretive Center. Inside we've got 2 floors of exhibits, talking about Paul Laurence Dunbar, talking about Wilbur and Orville Wright, their place in the community, their place within their fields.
And in front of us, we have the bicycle shop. Tell us about the bicycle shop.
Yeah, so this bike shop is where the Wrights worked for 2 years, so from about 1895 to 1897. And in this period, they're growing their business. They're taking it from being just a little repair shop to now a full-service bike shop, where they're making their own lines of bicycles in addition to repairs and selling parts and accessories. And it's here in this building in 1896 that they start thinking about their own active interest in flight for the first time.
What are some fun stories you can tell us about?
Well, the very first story that's told about the Wright brothers and their creativity involved Orville on the very first day of kindergarten. His mother kind of dragged him kicking and screaming down the front steps of the house and down the street to school. End of the day, he came back, he seemed much happy. Next morning, he got up, he got dressed, he went bounding down the street. No problem. Clearly a case of first day jitters. That happens with kids, right? Well, this went on for 3-4 weeks. Mother saw the teacher one day. Well, how's Orville doing? Orville? Orville who? He'd only been there that very first day. Turns out he was getting dressed each morning, going down the street, coming back home when he was supposed to. But each day he was doubling back to spend time with his friend Ed Sines, just 2 doors away. But neither Ed's parents nor Orville's got too upset with the boys when they found out they'd spent all of their time taking apart and then putting back together again his mother's old sewing machine. 2 kids, kindergarten.
So I love that he played hooky, but he continued to learn as he was doing it.
Exactly.
Which means his mom, Susan, probably had a good sense of humor with this. Tell us a little bit about Susan.
Yeah, both Susan and their father Milton really encouraged all the children of the Wright family to explore and really get into whatever interested them. Their mother grew up the daughter of a wagon maker, and so she grew up using tools, working with her hands, helping her dad in his business. So she is actually the one where they get their kind of inventive and engineering spirit from. She was making toys and things for the kids, a sled that they said kind of compared to the best sled you could buy in a store. And she made little gadgets for herself to help herself out around the house too.
So you said with all of her children, so there's another child involved, right?
There's a couple others. So
right.
we know Wilbur and Orville, they're actually kind of in the middle of the pack of the Wright family children. Their eldest brother was named Rushlin, kind of an exciting name. They all had kind of interesting names, even for that time period. Then came Lauren, the second eldest brother, then Wilbur, Orville, and then their little sister Catherine.
So I know they probably loved Catherine and doted on her.
They did. Catherine's the baby and the only girl, and she really was kind of the glue that kept the whole family together after Susan died when the kids were all teens.
So I noticed right now that our hats are trying to fly off.
Yes.
So that segues really well into the flight of Wilbur and Orville Wright. Now, coming from North Carolina, we claim a little bit of this.
Absolutely.
Right?
And rightfully so.
Rightfully so. I like that little pun there that you made. So tell us about the flights.
The Wrights' first experiments took place here in Dayton in 1899 with a kite that had about a 5-foot wingspan. They were not terribly successful in controlling it because the winds simply were not strong enough, despite what we're feeling today. So they started looking about for a place with stronger, more steady winds. But they also wanted a place that met other conditions. They wanted a place relatively free of trees and hills. They also wanted a place that was quite isolated, because even early on they were concerned about people who might steal their ideas and technology.
And there
So we're going to head inside to the museum and into the bike shop and see a little bit more. This is exciting, kids, because you're actually going to be walking with us. Let's go.
This is a full-scale replica of the Wright brothers' 1902 glider. Now, their first trip to North Carolina occurred in 1900. They returned again a year later. But the brothers were becoming very discouraged. Their machine was not performing the way they thought it should. Matter of fact, on the way back from Kitty Hawk in 1901, Wilbur commented that man would not fly for another 1,000 years. Talk about being discouraged. When they got back here, they sat down, they began very carefully looking at everything they were doing. They started by looking at the design of the machine itself. Maybe they had made some errors in its construction. They concluded that they had not. So then they began looking at the underlying information that they and everyone else in the world was using. Some of that information had come from a man named Otto Lilienthal. He was an experimenter working with gliders in Germany, at the time, probably the world's leading authority in aviation. Lilienthal had developed the lift tables. And that's a table of information saying that a wing of a certain design and size provided a certain amount of lift. But Lilienthal had been killed in the crash of one of his machines. Maybe it meant there was a problem there. Well, through the use of a wind tunnel, these guys figured out a way of testing that information. They did indeed find errors, in some cases as much as 20%. In the process of doing that, they perfect the shape of a wing. And that's what you see here. And it's one of those things that really set the stage for 1903 and everything that came after. Now, to fly this machine, the pilot lays in a hip cradle. As he shifts his weight from side to side, he can flex or bend the wingtips because the hip cradle is tied to the wing corners by cables like this one. At the same time he's doing that, the hip cradle also controls the movement of the rear rudder, which gave you a flat turn called yaw. And then his hands are on this forward bar, controlling the movement of the forward elevator for the third direction in flight, called pitch. So they had a way of controlling each of the three directions. The problem, basically, was the fact the Wrights could not go to the library. They could not take a book off the shelf on how to build and fly their own airplane. That book did not exist. This was a process of experimentation, a process of trial and error. And every machine they built represented the culmination of everything they'd learned up to that moment.
Welcome to the Wright's print shop. We're here on the second floor of the Hoover block in our museum. And this is where the Wrights were working for 5 years, so from 1890 to 1895. And 1890 is actually when this building was constructed, so they were some of the first tenants with their business. They rented these 2 rooms here, and they were operating small printing presses and then a larger printing press of their own design. And printing was this kind of massive industry in this time period, and also here in Dayton. There's tons of waterways. We had the Miami-Erie Canal coming through Dayton here. We have 5 different rivers, and so there's actually a lot of paper manufacturing and printers that go along with that here in Dayton. So the Wrights were really inspired as children. It started out as Orville's little kind of high school hobby to do some printing with some used letters and typeset and everything that he got for free from one of the printing companies here in Dayton. And he was doing little wood carvings of different illustrations and stuff and just kind of playing around. And he actually ended up dropping out of high school to pursue this career. It was making enough money, and he was printing little pamphlets and things, little newspapers. And then Wilbur comes on to be an editor. Also, while they're working here in this shop, this print shop, they start working with one of Orville's high school classmates, Paul Laurence Dunbar. And he was a famous poet and author later in their lives, but they start together here in this business venture. And Paul had been writing poetry since he was a small child, and he wanted to create a publication that went out to the African American community here in Dayton. And so he knew that his friend from high school, Orville Wright, had a print shop. And so they teamed up together and did a publication called the Dayton Tatler. And it only had 4 surviving issues that we know of, at least. So it was just kind of short-lived and a small little publication. But it was really cool that they were working together in each other's first business ventures before any of them go on to be famous.
This is the building that Wilbur and Orville Wright were working out of from the spring of 1895 until the fall of 1897. And this was the 4th of 5 locations for their bicycle business. From here, they began manufacturing their own line of bicycles in late 1895. But to do that, they added equipment like the lathe and the drill press. State-of-the-art technology. And with the decision to begin manufacturing, they became familiar with this equipment and all of its capabilities. Experience they could put to use then several years later. This building is also where the brothers were working when they first became actively interested in the whole idea of powered flight. So more than any other spot, this building truly is the birthplace of aviation. Now think of the world through Orville's eyes. Here he is literally the world's first pilot. He saw World War I. He saw the golden age of aviation during the 20s and 30s. He saw World War II and the dropping of the bomb. He saw the development of the modern jet engine because that took place here in Dayton. He also knew that Chuck Yeager had broken the sound barrier. Since then, we have flown to the moon and back. And today we've got a machine that flies 28.5 times faster than the speed of sound. And all of it begins right here in this building.
We're standing here in the Wright Cycle Company. As Bob said, this is where the Wrights worked from 1895 to 1897. And this period is a big period of change in technology. We're talking about bike technology before we get into aviation technology. And this is where the Wrights are starting. This is a type of bicycle that's popular in the kind of early to mid 1880s. And it's called a high wheel bicycle or a penny farthing or an ordinary bicycle. It's far from ordinary today, though. This large front wheel makes it a very fast type of bicycle, but you actually have to get kind of a running start to hop up onto it. You have to mount it while it's in motion. And while it's very fast, it's not very practical. This type of bicycle is really only accessible to young athletic men. Women, we're still wearing floor-length dresses in this period. It requires a lot of athleticism and agility, and so it's not a type of bicycle that's really available to everybody. But luckily for the Wrights and for us today, A new type of bicycle technology comes out just in the late 1880s. And this is called a safety bicycle. This is a safety bicycle here in front of the high wheel, and this is a ladies' version. So you can see that the top tube that normally would connect the handlebars to the seat actually swoops down to allow room for ladies' skirts. So this type of bicycle is called a safety bicycle because it's safer than the high wheel bicycle. You don't have to mount it while it's in motion. You can put your feet down to get off of it. You don't have to slide off the back and kind of land on your feet. And this is really opening up the world for people. This is giving people freedom of the road for the very first time before automobiles come along. This is making people's lives easier. It's faster to get to and from work and places you're shopping and whatnot. It's giving people independence and freedom that they never really had before. The Wrights are very smart. They got in on the ground floor of this bicycle craze in the 1890s by just starting a little repair shop over here in West Dayton to help their friends and neighbors to fix these types of technology. It grew in this period when they're here in this shop into a full-service bike shop. So they're producing their own lines of bicycles and doing repairs and selling parts and accessories. And this is where they first start thinking about aviation too, the next transportation technology that really changed people's lives.
So this has been amazing. As you can tell, we are filming this during the pandemic. So we're making sure that we're very safe and keeping our mask on inside and staying 6 feet apart. I'm going to go ahead and issue our STEM challenge to you. So our STEM challenge is this. We're going to marry the works and talents of Paul Laurence Dunbar and Orville and Wilbur Wright. Now we know that Paul probably did not see the planes that Wilbur and Orville were working on, or the gliders. But
Right.
if he had, we want you to create a picture book that tells the story of Wilbur and Orville Wright and flight, but using it in the style of Paul Laurence Dunbar in his poetry. So we want you to create a picture book using the poetry of Paul Laurence Dunbar and the beauty of flight that Wilbur and Orville Wright were involved with. And just be very creative with this. Now your book could be published. We're going to let Ranger Bob and Ranger Kathleen look at the book. You know what? Somebody may pick that up, but we want you to be creative. We want you to use your research in this, and you're going to tag this on social media at #NatParkChallenge, #ExpeditionsInEducation, and then always tag me at Dayton92, and I will share with the parks. You guys are a hoot. This was so much fun. We have gone from being outside in the beautiful sunshine to having hats fly all over the plaza to finding out what Bob's real perfect side looks like in camera. But before we go, we want you guys to tell our kids what they can start doing now to possibly get your jobs. So Kathleen, we'll let you just look at the camera. What are some tips that you can give them?
If you want to work eventually for a national park, it's great to start volunteering for a national park. It's a great way to get into any field, really, with whether it be a museum or a national park or doing kind of trail maintenance and stuff. There's tons of different opportunities to volunteer in your national parks and local parks too.
My advice would be follow your interests. There are 422 areas that make up the national park system today. No matter what your interest, there's a place for it somewhere within the national park system. But it's going to take work on your part. It's going to take determination and creativity and imagination. But you too could be standing here talking to visitors and talking to kids just like yourself.
Because Bob has only been here for a couple of days, he says. Well,
That's
actually
right.
25 years. But he and Kathleen both would love to have more people helping out with their jobs.
Absolutely.
In the Nat Park Challenge, we talk about passion intersects our purpose. And when we do that, we're going to be happy forever. Thanks so much for joining us today at this beautiful site with all of this living history. This is Dr. Drizzle, out.